Let me show you how to become a jihadi. You begin life in a small town in Pakistan. You used to help your father sell snacks at the bus stand, but now, at age 13, you've decided to look for work in a bigger city. By day, you earn money as a laborer, but at night, you try to make an extra buck by robbing houses and selling stolen things to a shady shopkeeper at the bazaar. You're saving up money to buy a fancy new gun from one of the several gun shops there. One day, you notice a stall at the bazaar set up by the Lashkar-e-Taiba. You've heard about some of their brave exploits fighting Indians in Kashmir, so you decide to talk to them. They tell you about the incredible life you could be leading in the service of Allah by taking up arms against the infidels in India. The life you have here is pathetic. Why not do something that will actually bring you glory? After an interview, they offer to pay your bus fare to a heavily guarded training complex where you'll receive a strictly orthodox Islamic education. You are not allowed to listen to music, watch television, or smoke. You start to show some real potential, so the camp wardens shortlist you for advanced training in a highly secret camp in Pakistan-controlled Kashmir. Here, you learn how to operate various firearms, navigate in the wilderness, and survival tactics. Your trainers lecture you on how Muslims have suffered atrocities in places like India, Palestine, and Afghanistan. They make you angry. They make you feel like you need to take revenge on the enemies of Islam. They make you feel like your life would actually be worth something if you served a greater cause. Finally, once your initiation is complete, you are chosen to lead a squad of fighters who will infiltrate the heart of India's financial capital, Mumbai. You are fully aware that this is a suicide mission, that there's no way for you to come back once the mission begins. But you are ready to give your life for the cause, ready to strike fear into the hearts of every Indian and every Hindu. This was the true life story of Ajmal Kasab, the man who, along with 9 other heavily armed terrorists, snuck into Mumbai on 26 November 2008 to conduct one of the most horrifying terrorist attacks in Indian history. When you hear the word terrorist, you probably think of a Muslim, right? But before the 1980s, Islamic terror organizations weren't really a thing. So, what changed in that decade? How did they become so powerful so quickly? And where do they get funding for all these advanced weapons? And why the hell has Pakistan been supporting terrorists in their backyard? Okay, we know why, but did you know that the biggest victim of terrorist attacks in the world is actually Pakistan? So, I ask you again, why the hell is Pakistan supporting terrorists? I decided to look for answers to these questions, and what I found reveals just how badly the Pakistani government screwed up their international politics, how they funded and supported the rise of radical extremist groups, and how innocent Pakistani civilians are paying the price. This is the story of Pakistan, the terrorism capital of the world. If you think Pakistan hiring unnamed militias to fight proxy wars for them is some new concept, let me take you back to October 1947, just 2 months after both India and Pakistan gained independence. At this point, leaders in both countries were trying to convince the rulers of smaller princely states to accede to either India or Pakistan. And it's here that Hari Singh, Maharaja of Kashmir, was struggling to make a decision. He was a Hindu, so India made sense, but most of Kashmir's population was Muslim, who would obviously prefer Pakistan. Except, both countries were still deeply mired in violence after the partition, and he couldn't be sure that either of them was stable enough to join. So, he decided that Kashmir would stay independent. Now, officially, Pakistan accepted his decision, but behind closed doors, the Pakistan army was brewing a plan that was unknown even to their own government. In fact, the only reason India came to learn of this plan was because it was accidentally revealed to an Indian officer deployed in the northwest. On 22nd October, more than 4,000 Pashtun warriors, known as Lashkars, carrying weapons supplied by the Pakistan army, descended on Kashmir. These were mostly tribesmen from northwest Pakistan and Afghanistan who were secretly recruited by the Pakistan army to invade Kashmir and establish Pakistani dominance there. For several days, Kashmir burned as the Lashkars swept through multiple cities, gunning down Hindu and Sikh civilians, enslaving non-Muslim women, and looting their homes. This was the ugly beginning of nearly 8 decades of conflict between India and Pakistan. But the people of Kashmir could never have anticipated that their quiet, idyllic mountain province would turn into a battlefield, becoming the centerpiece of multiple wars, terrorist attacks, and espionage between the two countries. But after the first Indo-Pak war, things weren't looking good for Pakistan. The country was being eaten alive by internal struggles, violent rebellions in Balochistan, no support for farmers in an agrarian state, an economy slipping deeper into poverty, and a deeply divided Muslim population that had strongly conflicting political ideologies. And while the corrupt, ineffectual government teetered on the brink of collapse, the military had grown extremely powerful. In 1958, something happened that would have horrified the founder of the nation, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. The government was overthrown by the army in a coup d'etat, turning Pakistan into a military dictatorship. This event was a sort of point of no return for Pakistan. Once the military gained supreme power in the government, there was nothing to limit their operations, no checks and balances that could hold them accountable to the public. This was also around the time that the ISI, Pakistan's foreign intelligence agency, began to really grow in power and influence. As we'll see later in this video, the ISI didn't just send spies to infiltrate India. They colluded with criminals and the mafia to terrorize our population, printed fake Indian currency to destabilize our economy, and funded and trained terrorist groups against India. Their first real foray into wartime intelligence was Operation Gibraltar in 1965, in which thousands of Pakistani troops infiltrated Kashmir disguised as locals, with the aim of mingling and inciting rebellion among the populace, engaging in guerrilla warfare, and destroying roads, bridges, and tunnels. Pakistan was sure the people of Kashmir were deeply unsatisfied with the Indian government and would readily take up the opportunity to revolt on Pakistan's behalf. Except, it didn't go that way at all. Kashmiris weren't really interested in separating from India, and moreover, they supplied Indian troops with information that helped them launch a counter-offensive, kicking off the Second India-Pakistan War. But even as Pakistan waged a messy, unwinnable war on its neighbor, its internal politics grew more chaotic than ever. The government was permanently stuck in the shadow of the all-powerful military, while inequality between landowning elites and poor peasants created deep divides in the population. But the deepest divisions arose from the various Islamic communities of Pakistan. Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto ran his government on secular lines, which was unacceptable to conservative Muslims who were trying to establish Sharia law in Pakistan. They forced him to declare Pakistan an Islamic state, passing new laws to ensure only Muslims could become president or prime minister. It was under his rule that religious leaders in Pakistan singled out the Ahmadiyya community for practicing a different form of Islam, declaring them to be non-Muslims. Overnight, a community of over 1 million people had been stripped of their religious identity and became the targets of violent riots and lynchings. This kind of religious intolerance, even within the Muslim population, would eventually split the country into several warring factions, making it that much easier to justify violence and organize terrorist activity in the name of religion. As if all this wasn't enough, Pakistan had another, much more immediate problem. Before 1971, Pakistan was actually two countries in one. West Pakistan, which is the Pakistan we know today, and East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. Since independence, West Pakistan had been by far the dominant half, especially in politics. But that would change in 1971, when the Awami League from East Pakistan won the national elections in a landslide. I won't get into the details here because I have a whole other video covering this topic which you can watch later, link in the description. But West Pakistan refused to accept this victory and invaded their eastern half, triggering the Bangladesh Liberation War of 1971. Pakistan wasn't prepared for the magnitude of their defeat against India. Not only were they internationally condemned for the genocide of Bengalis by Pakistani troops, but they'd suddenly lost over half their population and economic output when Bangladesh declared itself a sovereign nation. Not to mention all the money and resources that had gone into fighting the war. The government scrambled to bring in reforms to fix the situation, but the damage had already been done. At this point, the last person you'd want to be was the Prime Minister. Pakistan was in full meltdown, with Balochistan calling for independence, bomb blasts and assassinations of political figures, and nationwide protests that had turned deadly. The moment couldn't have been worse for Zulfikar Bhutto, who had a giant target painted on his back. But for another man, all this chaos was actually the perfect opportunity. I've so far only spoken about Pakistan, but the story of jihad and terrorism actually begins with their neighbor. In the late 1970s, Afghanistan was caught in the midst of a proxy war between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviets wanted to support the communist government that had taken control of Afghanistan, while the US wanted to stop the spread of communism into Asia. So, when the Soviets deployed troops into Afghanistan, the US went straight to local warlords and Pashtun tribes, giving them weapons, training, and funding to fight against the Soviet invasion. While the global superpowers were playing geopolitical chess with human lives in Afghanistan, a new power was rising in Pakistan. In July 1977, Pakistan's army chief Zia-ul-Haq launched a coup against Zulfikar Bhutto, overthrowing the government and executing the prime minister. Zia was a dictator in every sense of the term, running a brutal regime where anyone who dared to speak against him would be imprisoned, publicly flogged, and even killed. He was also a close ally of the US, acting as their man on the inside in Afghanistan by supporting the Mujahideen in their war against the Soviets. Above all else, Zia was a staunch Sunni Muslim who wanted to turn Pakistan into a pure Sunni society and purge all other false factions of Islam like the Shiites, Ahmadiyas, and dozens of other sects of Islam in the country. Now, I cannot stress enough how perfect the timing was for Zia-ul-Haq to become Prime Minister. Just as he rose to power, Iran next door was plunged into a massive revolution to overthrow the authoritarian government, and the man leading this revolution was Ruhollah Khomeini, or as he was later known, Ayatollah Khomeini, the grand leader of Shia Islam around the world. This got Saudi Arabia really worried. As the foremost and, I suppose, original Sunni Muslim country, the Saudis had a vested interest in spreading their specific brand of Islam to the world. So when they saw that Iran was being taken over by a Shia leader, Pakistan looked like the perfect launchpad for an opposing Sunni movement. Within just 2 years of taking office, Zia-ul-Haq had made Pakistan a player in two different proxy wars, a political war to combat communism and a religious war to fight the Shias. What could possibly go wrong? Pakistan before Zia wasn't exactly tolerant of non-Muslims, but once he came along, things got so much worse. Restaurants were forced to close at daytime during Ramadan, more religious programs were broadcast on TV, and the education curriculum in schools glorified Islam while dismissing or even denouncing everything non-Islamic about Pakistan's history. Women were pressured to wear hijabs and burqas, and extracts of the Quran were to be posted on the walls of offices and schools. Zia also encouraged the spread of madrasas across the country. Traditionally, these schools were similar to gurukuls, where students, often from a poor background, could stay and receive an education in Islamic scripture and become scholars or mullahs. But after Zia, madrasas became more and more extremist, teaching a very hardline orthodox interpretation of Islam called Wahhabism, which was the dominant ideology in Saudi Arabia. Young boys throughout Pakistan were indoctrinated in an intense and narrow worldview, where only their intolerant way of life was morally right, and everyone else was a kafir who deserved punishment by death. What happened next wasn't some great unification of the Muslim population of Pakistan. Instead, the country became even more divided on sectarian lines than before, with Shias being branded as non-Muslims by the Sunni majority, and attacks by Sunni radicals against Shias became worryingly common. If you didn't already guess, it was really Zia-ul-Haq, this brutal, hardline Islamic dictator, who set events in motion that would lead to Pakistan becoming the terrorism capital of the world. He was now deeply involved with CIA operations in Afghanistan, funneling billions of American dollars to supply Mujahideen fighters with advanced weaponry like missiles and rocket launchers. He directed the ISI to set up training camps where officers taught Mujahideen fighters how to operate those weapons and employ battlefield tactics. At the same time, he was opening the doors to Saudi politicians and investors who pumped billions of dollars to fund the building of more and more madrasas that taught orthodox Sunni Wahhabism. As the war with the Soviets raged on in Afghanistan, thousands of Afghan refugees poured into Pakistan. Any guesses where young Afghan refugee boys could get free food and education? For context, Pakistan in 1971 had something like 900 madrasas. By the end of Zia ul-Haq's reign in 1988, there were something like 8,000 registered madrasas, with a further 25,000 unregistered ones all over the country, many of them along the border with Afghanistan. It's estimated that Pakistan has received more funding from Saudi Arabia than any other country, most of which went to these madrasas. And as the war in Afghanistan dragged on, these schools leaned harder into indoctrinating young boys to undertake jihad against the Soviets. They had effectively created a massive force of radicalized, well-trained fighters with no political affiliation, only a strong motivation to destroy anyone who didn't subscribe to their regressive ideologies. The next part of Zia's plan was already in motion by the time he died in 1988, after ruling for 11 years. The war in Afghanistan was almost at an end, with the Soviets beating a humiliating retreat just like the Americans had in Vietnam. With their enemy gone, the US was totally done with Afghanistan and dropped them like a bag of bricks. This was Pakistan's chance. They had on their hands an army that had received military training, but crucially had none of the culpability of the actual Pakistani military. If the US could use them to fight a proxy war against its greatest rival, why couldn't Pakistan? Even if someone found out, they could just deny everything, right? But as Pakistan was about to discover, things weren't going to be quite so simple. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, please drop a like and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me make more videos like this. Now back to Pakistan. Once the Soviets and the US pulled out of Afghanistan, the already lawless nation was plunged into a state of unmitigated anarchy. Dozens of tribes, armed to the teeth and vying for political power, turned the country into a sort of Wild West where weapons and drugs were freely traded and criminals roamed free. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Jihadi groups started making and selling huge quantities of opium, which they shipped through Pakistan's ports in Karachi to fuel the international heroin trade. These roving bands of men, trained and indoctrinated in Pakistani madrasas, formed militant groups that allied with Pakistan to fight against the enemies of Islam. The most successful of those groups, the Taliban, would go on to control the entire country of Afghanistan and became the backbone of Pakistan's terrorist operations in India. By the 1990s, the ISI had come a long way from its days as a minor wing of the Pakistani military. ISI agents were working with terrorist groups to recruit and train more soldiers. They were rigging elections in Pakistan and spying on opponents of the government. All sorts of nasty things were brewing in the Afghan-Pakistan alliance, and it was India who was going to taste this bitter concoction.
Once again, the metropolis of Bombay has looked on in stunned disbelief. 13 lethal bomb blasts on Friday, 12th of March, ripped the confidence that was returning to the beleaguered city after the communal carnage of December and January.
On Friday, 12th March 1993, India's financial capital was hit by a devastating series of 13 bomb blasts that killed 250 people and injured over 1,000. It was quickly traced back to Dawood Ibrahim, the most notorious mafia don in Mumbai, but it was only later that Indian authorities discovered his links to the ISI, who allegedly helped him coordinate the attack. As the dust settled, Dawood fled to Pakistan to avoid capture. It's believed he still resides in Karachi under the protection of the Pakistani state. Of course, Pakistan denied all these allegations, and the masterminds of the worst terrorist attack on Indian soil got away scot-free. That's kind of always been Pakistan's game plan. Secretly coordinate an attack using proxy actors, then deny. But Kashmir has remained ground zero for Pakistan-sponsored terrorism. Between 1995 and 2025, Islamic terrorist groups launched 20 attacks on mostly Hindu civilians in Kashmir. Mass shootings, car bombs, suicide bombers, every possible tactic was employed to induce paranoia and fear into the Kashmiri public. In 1999, Pakistani troops disguised as Mujahideen fighters invaded India-occupied Kashmir, triggering the Kargil War. Both countries were now nuclear powers, and there was a very real threat of the conflict escalating into all-out nuclear war. For once, the United States decided to actually do something useful and issued threats to Pakistan, warning them off from making any foolhardy mistakes. But then, the unthinkable happened. The most deadly terrorist attack on any nation in history, a day that would live on in infamy. Terror group Al-Qaeda had effectively declared war on the most powerful nation in the world with their attack on the Twin Towers, launching America's war on terror. Right about now, Pakistan was looking very guilty, especially given their years of supporting terrorists like Osama bin Laden. The US gave them an ultimatum: help them track down the people responsible or be treated as the enemy. Desperate to not anger their biggest ally, Pakistan was forced to support America's invasion of Afghanistan. So get this right, one country that invented the concept of using foreign fighters to wage a proxy war, and the other country that trained them into religiously indoctrinated suicide squads, were now teaming up to clean up the mess they themselves had created. The irony is both delicious and disgusting. But see, here's the thing about supporting violent extremists. The second you do something they don't like, they're gonna turn on you, and that's when things get real ugly. Several jihadi groups became furious at Pakistan for siding with the US, declaring them traitors of Islam. They came together as a united force called the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, launching a wave of bombings targeting leaders, government buildings, and military headquarters. The worst of them was the siege of Lal Masjid, in which radicalized students in the Lal Masjid, one of the oldest mosques in Islamabad, got in an intense 8-day firefight with the Pakistani military. This event, in which 120 militants were killed, including young women, would eventually contribute to the downfall of the then President Pervez Musharraf. Ultimately, it's the innocent people of Pakistan who have paid the heaviest price for their government's repeated blunders. In just the last 30 years, more than 22,000 Pakistanis, mostly civilians, have been killed by terrorist attacks within the country, and many more injured. In supporting extremist organizations, Pakistan had made a deal with the devil, and now he was coming to extract his pound of flesh year after year. Of course, the true extent of the Pakistan state's involvement in terrorist activities was completely exposed when Ajmal Kasab was captured during the terrible Mumbai attack on 26 November 2008 by the heroic police constable Tukaram Omble. Kasab's confession revealed that, far from a hyper-religious fanatic, he was merely a man from a poor background, fed lies about India's prosperity and Pakistan's poverty, and promised that his family would be handsomely compensated once the mission had gone off successfully. He even said that if he was given money and food, he'd serve India the same way he'd served the Lashkar-e-Taiba. It's believed that Kasab's capture foiled Pakistan's plan of denying any involvement and claiming the whole thing was some Hindu conspiracy. In the years since, these terror groups have gotten so influential in Pakistan that even if they wanted to, the government wouldn't be able to lift a finger against them without the risk of even more violent attacks on government officials and innocent civilians. So instead, they continue to support each other, and India has been on the receiving end. There's just one crucial difference. India in the 1990s and early 2000s often silently endured the jihadist onslaught, only making weak allegations against Pakistan. But India today is not that same nation. After the 2025 Pahalgam terror attack, India retaliated with Operation Sindoor, a series of missile and air strikes against terror camps and air bases in Pakistan and Kashmir. For the first time in years, India was responding with decisive military action instead of pleading with the international community for help. Today, India has declared that any act of terrorism by Pakistan will be viewed as an act of war. And given India's military superiority and track record of victories against them, Pakistan will probably think twice before planning another attack on us. But one thing is certain, sooner or later, they will try again. Pakistan continues to receive billions of dollars in funding through the IMF, no doubt provided by their longtime ally, the United States, who have a vested interest in keeping India's power in check. We have officially entered a new era of state-backed terrorism, one in which the Pakistani defense minister admits to the government backing terrorist groups for the last 3 decades on international news, and the US president is being openly hostile to India. The question that we should be asking ourselves now is, will India fight back? Because if you watch my video on the 1971 India-Pakistan war, you'll see how Indira Gandhi took decisive action and sent the Indian military to liberate Bangladesh and end Pakistan's genocide of Bengalis. India had just 15 days to invade Bangladesh, capture Dhaka, and drive out Pakistan. And the way they did it, using a combination of land, water, and air-based warfare, is one of the most fascinating stories in military history. So click this video for that full story. Thanks for watching. Please support my channel by liking this video, get subscribed, and become a channel member to help me keep making videos like this. And I'll see you in the next one.